Brown v. Board of Education was a landmark civil rights case decided in May of 1954 by the United States Supreme Court. It was a culmination of 5 similar cases argued as one in the Supreme Court. The issue at hand had to deal with the 14th Amendment and desegregation in schools. Oliver Brown, the petitioner, was fighting for school desegregation because he felt that the separate but equal rule of law was not being accomplished from the 1896 Supreme Court decision of Plessy v. Ferguson. Although blacks and whites were given the same facilities, the blacks were at an obvious disadvantage because of their race, and therefore it was thought that their schools would be at a lesser standard than the whites. The blacks wanted to prove that they were just as mentally capable as the whites, plus they wanted to better their situation by attending the white schools, and in turn they would be given more opportunities. With the help of Thurgood Marshall, the most prominent civil rights activist in terms of legality issues, Brown argued that the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause had been violated and called for desegregation in schools. Even Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote that, "In the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place." In a landmark decision of 9-0, Brown won the case, and desegregation in schools was to be no more. But there was a deliberate complication in which the Supreme Court decided to reconvene on the issue a year later to determine the actual proceedings of desegregation in schools. The court would decide on what pace desegregation in schools would happen, but they knew they would encounter roadblocks along the way with white supremacists. This would be Brown v. Board of Education 2, and the issue at hand would be decided next May, 1955. Brown 2, as it is called, was a Supreme Court follow-up case. It was used to determine in which way the court should proceed in carrying out the decision in Brown 1. The decision being in Brown 1 that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional because it violates the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The Supreme Court decided to determine the procedure for carrying out the verdict in Brown 1 by reconvening a year later in 1955. In late May of 1955, the Supreme Court agreed on a decision of how to carry out the decision in Brown v. Board of Education 1. In a 9-0 vote, the Supreme Court decided the best way to go about enforcing the new policy of no segregation in public schools was to let the schools and courts of the area deal with the situation. The famous phrase said in Chief Justice Warren's unanimous speech to the course was that desegregation in public schools on a racially non-discriminatory basis with all deliberate speed will happen. This means that the courts and schools pretty much get their way around desegregation in schools by making up excuses and stating that they are going as fast as they can. After this landmark decision, many schools desegregated right away, while others had already done so, and some would not for years to come. Brown v. Board of Education 2 was of great importance to the civil rights movement because it finalized a major step, that being desegregation in schools.
The jury found them innocent, and the brothers, they went.
The White Citizens Council was a white supremacist group mostly in the South. It was founded in 1954 by a St. Louis attorney named Gordon Lee Baum, but took roots in Alabama. Unlike the Ku Klux Klan, the White Citizens Council was made of mostly middle and upper class membership. But like the KKK, the White Citizens Council was a violent, but for the most part organized group that used intimidation and violence to deter the efforts of the civil rights activists. At the peak of the council, its membership included upwards of 60,000 white people. The influence of the council was so great that a month after the start of the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott, W.A. Gale, the mayor of Montgomery, joined the WCC. Gale stated of his new membership that, "I think every right-thinking white person in Montgomery, Alabama, and in the South should do the same. We must make certain that Negroes are not allowed to force their demands on us." The WCC participated greatly in the violence committed against the blacks during the Montgomery bus boycott. One example of the White Citizens Council terror during the boycott in Montgomery was when members of the civil rights activist group, the Montgomery Improvement Association's houses were bombed. Also, members of the WCC threatened insurance agencies in the South to cancel policies on church-owned vehicles. The WCC was obviously a very terrorizing and brutal group that tried, but eventually failed in stopping the civil rights movement.
Till was born in Chicago in 1941 when racism was a height in America. At the age of 14, he was visiting his cousins in Mississippi when he met his unfortunate death. He went to a store where he whistled at a white lady while going to the store. At about 12:30 a.m. on Sunday, August 28, 1955, Brian and his half-brother J.W. Milne went to find Emmett to identify if he was the one that whistled at the white lady. When it was confirmed that Till was in fact the talker, the men put him in the back of a pickup truck and drove away. According to witnesses, they drove him to a weathered shed on a plantation in neighboring Sunflower County. Till had been beaten and eye gouged out before he was shot through the head and thrown into the Tallahatchie River with a 70-pound cotton gin fan tied around his neck. This was noted as one of the leading events of the American Civil Rights Movement. Emmett's mother, Mammy Till, decided to have an open casket at the funeral so everyone could see the brutality of what happened to her son. The husband of the white woman in the store and his half-brother were tried for Emmett and acquitted by a jury of 12 white men. This made national news and got the Civil Rights Movement even more fired up.
The Montgomery bus boycott started in December 1955. Probably the most famous thing in the Montgomery bus boycott was Rosa Parks. People had been looking for the right person for a very important role. They would arrest somebody who would make the blacks very angry, but at the same time they had to pick someone who was above reproach, meaning someone who couldn't be criticized based on earlier actions. That person, they thought, was Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks had one day refused to move to the back of the bus when a white person stepped onto it. The problem was that the white rows were full, and the rule was that blacks and whites could not sit in the same row, and the blacks must move back. When she was arrested, she was asked if she would go through with the plan of somebody's protesting the bus segregation problems in court, and she agreed. She was the perfect person because she was smart and very well respected and with no criminal record. Joanne Robinson handed out flyers that night about Rosa Parks and her upcoming trial. At first, discussions about the plan didn't go well, but in the MIA, Montgomery Improvement Association, and the people talking about the bus boycott plan voted one night, and the votes were almost all in favor of continuing the bus boycott plans. The first time it was taken, the bus company, uh, the bus company on December 8th, it wasn't even considered. The whites tried extremely hard to stop the bus boycott. They even bombed two houses trying to stop it, but everything they tried failed. The whites tried to negotiate because they was losing thousands in bus fees, but the blacks refused anything less than full equality on the buses. The city eventually gave in, and in a 2-to-1 vote, the blacks won. The city appealed the case, but on November 13, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court said that segregation that was going on the buses was unconstitutional. The Montgomery bus boycott was finally over. The king of the local church said it was over. We have gained a new sense of dignity and destiny. We have discovered a new powerful weapon, nonviolent resistance. Would throw eggs, rocks, sticks, and a variety of other things at her, and she had to have army personnel around her at all times. After a number of weeks, she was expelled because people were concerned for her personal safety. Everybody was happy, but this didn't stop. Black people kept applying to the University of Alabama, and they kept accepting them. Eventually, the people gave up their efforts to keep the blacks out of their school. 10 states followed this example of desegregation, and desegregation spread. Arthur and Lucy's expulsion was overturned finally in 1988, and she was allowed back.
Southern Manifesto was a document written February and March of 1956 by legislators in the United States. Congress opposed to racial integration in public places. The document was largely drawn up to the counter landmark Supreme Court 1954 ruling Brown versus Board of Education. The manifesto was signed by 19 senators and 82 members of the House of Representatives. The initial version was written by Storm Thurmond, and the final version mainly by Richard Russell. The Southern Manifesto accused the Supreme Court of clear abuse by judicial power. Refusal to sign occurred most prominently among the Texas and Tennessee delegations, where the majority of members of the United States House of Representatives refused to sign. Chuck Berry was known for his rock and roll and blues music. He is known to many as the father of rock and roll. Consequently, during the 1920s and 30s, the Ville became synonymous with black prosperity, with songs such as Maybelline, A Roll Over Beethoven, rock and roll music, and Johnny B. Good developed rhythm and blues. As an African American, he was the first guitarist to reach the charts. Later on in his career, he served a prison sentence for armed robbery. While in prison, Berry joined a gospel group and boxed briefly during being released on his 21st birthday in 1947. He was an inspiration for the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. He's still living at the age of 83 and giving concerts worldwide.